I remember one of my first quote unquote big jobs was one that I literally got from an ad in the newspaper. And so I kind of like, I'm having an AI moment because I'm reading this ad in the newspaper at the time. That's where we used to find our jobs and going, oh my God, this is exactly me. Like that's me. I do that. Oh, I know how to do that. Oh yeah. This job description was written for me. Right. So I took my little, AI mind and wrote a nice resume to match it. But it's kind of like that, right? You're trying to find exact matches. And in the real world, I think, sometimes we overlook the capabilities and the skills that people have that might work well for the job, even if they haven't been in the exact kind of role before.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, and welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the HR tech news that everyone needs to know to be in the know. Now, before we get started, you might have noticed my voice is a little deeper. I'm not actually Stacey Harris. This is Cliff Stevenson, because this is going to be a very special episode. Stacey Harris is out this particular episode. She will be back. She is out for medical reasons, but it is nothing serious and nothing to worry about. But I'm sure she would love to know that all of you are thinking of her, so feel free to write her. If you know the show, then you know that we break down the news of the week every week to help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on October 24th, 2024, but this episode will actually release on Halloween. So I am joined today by Teri Zipper, CEO and managing partner of Sapient Insights Group, to bring us an extra spooky set of news from the HR tech world. Teri, besides being the CEO and managing partner of Sapient Insights Group, I'd say more importantly is the host of our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem. And that one, Teri, you normally interview people, prominent members from the HR and just business community. So welcome to the show, Teri. I know we've got some extra scary tea to spill today. I'm kind of hyping it up. It's just regular news, everyone. Don't be frightened.
Thanks, Cliff. I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I can live up to Stacey's side of this week. I'm a little intimidated seeing for Stacey, but
makes you feel better. I think
under control.
Yeah, if it makes you feel better, I think I'm the one who has to live up to Stacey as the host. You just have to be me. For those of you that are listening on the podcast and don't know, we also broadcast this on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and search Sapient Insights Group, you'll be able to find this. And I recommend at least popping by, because unplanned, Teri and I are wearing matching but opposite outfits, and
inside out, right?
Yeah. Seriously, it was unplanned. So, just in case this is your first time and this is all very confusing to you, I've introduced Teri. My name is Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group, which is a research and advisory firm. A few promotional items before we get started. So we've been talking quite a bit about our big 27th annual HR Systems Survey report. That will actually be releasing on the day that you're hearing this, assuming you're hearing it right when it releases on October 31st. And we're going to be having a special sort of promotional webinar that will air at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, GMT -5 for all of our European and global listeners, where we're going to share results from the big HR Systems Survey, some of which we've sort of teased on the show before, but this will be hosted by HR Executive. So if you're hearing this early enough on the 31st, you can go over to the website, find the link, and we'll see you over there. A few other things. We're going to be traveling. I'll be in Philadelphia for Unit 4's conference on November 6th and 7th. Both Teri and I will both be at UKG's Aspire conference on November 12th and 13th. Dayforce Discover, I'll be going to right after that on the 14th. That will also be in Las Vegas. And Stacy will be at Workday Europe on November 12th and 14th. And I believe there's also a CHRO conference sort of wedged in there right around the time of UKG Aspire. Is that right, Teri?
That's right. Yeah. Put on by HR executive. And
Excellent.
Susan will be leading the charge on that one and talking about change leadership.
Wonderful. And we've just also wrapped up our first cohort education series that just happened earlier this week, the week of the 24th. I think it was actually on the 22nd. We wrapped that up. So I just want to say congratulations to any of the members of that. That was really wonderful, really great to be a part of. I think there might have been some tearing up at the end, but I know we're going to be moving on to the next part of that education series. Is that right, Teri? I don't know if we have specific dates for that yet.
That's right. We have a couple of other things coming out of that. So there's a change cohort starting in January, and then the next HR system strategy cohort, I think we're targeting March. So be on the lookout for those options. They're already actually up on the website if you're interested in attending or being a part of one of those cohorts. It really was a great session, and can't say enough about it. Looking forward to the feedback so we can go into, that was the inaugural session. So we'll be going into the second version of it, which will take into account everything we learned in the first version, which was a lot.
Yes. Yeah, it was an education series ostensibly for the people taking it, but I'd say we learned quite a bit as well. I think that was my big takeaway is, all of the data and everything that we provide and that we gather through the survey, to see it actually take place in the work everyone was doing. Many of them were going through periods of pretty intense change. Either they had switched jobs or their particular workplace was going through a lot of change, which I know is your specialty, Teri, but it was fascinating to hear it when a lot of times I'm sort of behind writing, which for any of you, again, watching on YouTube that have noticed the scruff, that is because we have wrapped up that paper, which, Teri, I don't know if I've told you yet, but we got the final count. It's 248 pages this year. So for those of you receiving the paper, that's your first bit of scary news. You've got a couple days of reading.
You get points for reading the entire
That's right.
paper this year.
That's right. So we've got some spooky news. We've got some acquisitions. I guess that can be scary, but it can also be pretty positive. We've got some promotions, some new people. We've got some renaming and just some, new products coming out. Teri, what have you got for us?
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, first of all, if we can make it through this episode without mentioning AI.
You just did.
I don't think we can. I was also just thinking, well, maybe we should, every time we say the word AI, we have to take a drink.
Right.
And then that would result in a really scary episode. Mm-hmm. So we won't do that. But I was laughing listening to a couple of the most recent spilling the teas and just laughing at how, just how much we're talking about that topic. So we will probably mention that a little bit later.
Probably.
The first story up for bid, if you will, is ADP acquires Workforce Software. Yeah. So, everybody knows ADP, right? I mean, if you don't know ADP, you just landed on the planet. And Workforce Software, they're kind of known for, global optimization for workforce planning. I think workforce planning is going to be a big theme of this conversation today. They do time and attendance, scheduling, forecasting, leave of absence, but they've kind of been teamed up with SAP for like 10 years now. So I thought this was a really interesting move. And it is a gap for ADP, at least from my perspective. I think it's a smart move if they can integrate it properly. I know clients right now that, use ADP have a need for this capability. So I think it's a pretty smart move. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Cliff, just given where they've been and now sort of, in the ADP world. Yeah,
it's pretty fascinating. So as you mentioned, people know ADP. We've worked with ADP. We've worked for Workforce Software. And, we sometimes get the question, well, how far in advance did you know about these sort of things? And I actually didn't. This one completely surprised me. I mean, I might have known a day or two before, but certainly not as it was brewing, despite how close we followed these companies and how well we know some of the people there. And as you said, workforce software, I remember going to conferences of theirs, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even longer. And, it was quite small. It really felt like more of a time and attendance with some other things coming on. I'm sure they would not have described themselves that way. I just mean, as an analyst, often would think of that. But, that's like saying ADP is only payroll. That's just simply not the case. It just might have been the public perception. But workforce software, especially in the last conference I went to a few months ago, you really start to realize what they do best is handle these really complex workforce planning situations. Most of their customer stories dealt with big acquisitions or mergers among really large, highly unionized, or at least collective bargaining, agreements that were in these environments. And it's just so much going on and trying to have everything under one sort of scope. And, the importance of data nowadays, I think, is what drives a lot of the interest in having a solution like workforce software, right? When you have these really complex, highly regulated groups that you're dealing with, and then you're trying to figure out, how do we have a sort of single source of truth? How do we have all this data in one place so we can do the type of strategic workforce planning? And that's what they really provide, is creating that groundwork, getting that all there. And I think that fits in nicely with what ADP is trying to do, which is handle those sort of environments and create a centralized data environment to help you make more evidence-based decisions and that type of thing. So I think it really works well with what they're trying to maintain for the future. Interestingly enough, this is just my personal take. I think that the cultures of those two organizations will work well together. Both of them have I wouldn't call it an engineering background in the sense that, it's engineers, but they have that mindset, if you've ever worked for the Raytheons or dealt with them, where they take a very sort of, just a sort of strict, or maybe let's just say, they don't have that kind of silly sort of high tech things that you sort of worry about in those worlds where it's like, we're, highly, we're going to take risks, or we're going to do very, maybe sometimes off the wall stuff. No, they kind of play it by the book. And I think that that's a good thing. They're matching those sort of things up.
Yeah. And, ADP is big and complex, but they also have a tendency to do a really good job of integrating solutions where they're bringing in a level of expertise that they don't really have today. And I'm not saying they don't have expertise to do time and attendance, but they have a number of time and attendance solutions, either through their, primary platform or through their partner platforms, that do not have the level of complexity that a lot of these organizations need. I mean, I personally am working with a couple of organizations right now who this is their biggest thorn. Mm-hmm. Because in order to do workforce planning and to integrate with financial services and invoice and do things like that, they're using multiple systems and doing a lot of manual work. So it's things like this, what workforce software is doing, if integrated well, will be a really great add-on for ADP because it's a gap.
It is. Yeah. And I think you're right that we're going to be hearing a lot more of it this year. Because I think it's all tied in. I don't think it's necessarily that this is going to be sort of in lieu of the skills conversation or the AI conversation. I think all of those go together, right? We're starting to see how all of this works as one to help us sort of achieve the business goals. I think it's really pretty telling that there's a lot of money being spent in these areas, which kind of proves that everyone sees it that way, or at least, some of the innovators see it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to see that again.
Yeah.
In another spooky story.
Yeah.
So iCIMS.
Yeah.
They're in the news. They appointed Jody Kaminsky as their chief marketing officer. Mm-hmm. She's a real veteran, right? A lot of experience as a CMO. So she, this is not her second gig. She's been on advising boards. She's been in the public and private tech. So she knows her way around this market. And this seems like a good move to me. I mean, iCIMS is one of the top, the top, according to this year's Voice of the Customer in our survey, talent acquisition tools on the market. But I kind of think they have a little bit of a branding issue. And so that, in my mind, that's kind of what I'm looking for Jody to come in and do is how do we get our messaging aligned and, help people understand what we offer.
And I don't know if there's anyone, sort of better suited for this particular challenge because, she comes from UKG and Ultimate as well. Know Jody. And, it's hard to imagine a world where you don't know UKG or I would say Ultimate before that. But that was an issue at one point, everyone knew Workday and there was a time when Ultimate needed to sort of come up and develop their brand and really get across their unique cultural aspects. And that was the case with UKG as well, because, they've been unknown. All they knew that there was the merger between the two companies. And that was right when Jody was sort of at the helm there as the CMO. Yeah. So being a part of that, I think will really help with iCIMS as they continue to grow. As you said, they were top ranked in Voice of the Customer, well-known brand, but they are known, as you said, for talent acquisition, and they're really more than that. They are expanding. They have a lot of different offerings. They show up as well in, for instance, in onboarding, which I know is often linked, but isn't, does sort of provide that sort of next step within that development and, are really groundbreaking when it comes to looking at things like, skills, again, bringing it up.
Yeah.
How do you acquire those and how does that work within both internally and externally to your organization? So I think it's a great move for both Jody and for iCIMS. So I'm really happy to see it.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, iCIMS, of course, is well known, but I think, and you might have an opinion on this. This is just my thought. Some of it is they've grown pretty substantially and grown up market. And I think they have, a sizable number of smaller clients that really aren't, maybe aren't seeing the opportunity for services and some of the things like, the offering was just sort of, hey, here's this basic package. So I think there's some communication and some messaging to their existing clients. I mean, talent acquisition is another one of those areas it's complicated, right? I mean, it's not just, hey, how do I, it's not just recruiting and setting up appointments, right? Just the whole process of, finding people and talking to people and scheduling meetings and finding the right person and then onboarding them into your HRMS. And, there's a lot of touch points. So I think there's still a lot of things people are doing manually because they haven't quite figured out how to make it all seamless. And I know iCIMS has added a lot of capabilities over the years. How do we make sure as a client of iCIMS, we're taking advantage of all those capabilities? And, that I'm hoping that's something that, can get communicated and become part of the lexicon there.
That's right. And not to just force people to drink, but they have instituted a lot of new AI features.
Exactly.
And, how to get people to understand that, because I think the one area where people might push back sometimes with AI is in the talent acquisition space, right? Because that's the one place where we've seen, maybe not the one place, but the main place where we've seen some of the negative consequences of using AI, generally down to, bias being built into the system to the data that's part of the foundation of that AI, then going on and recommending people that all sort of fall under one class, right? So you end up with a biased group and you're going, well, I don't want this sort of recommendation. Where does the human intervention come in? So instead, they're going to need to help people understand this AI can be used to help with sort of repetitive tasks, not necessarily replacing, the human mind, but also to identify the bias rather than perpetuating it. It can help see that, here is where these sort of trends are going and, spot those things rather than being a recommendation engine, which, really no one is looking for, right? But instead going, how do we help improve my human skills rather than replace them or, make them worse. So.
Yeah. And I just was reading something the other day, recruiters basically saying that, they can spot a resume written by AI in, half a second, right? I mean, it's not hard. And they're not loving that part of it, right? But on the flip side, I think we got to be careful as to how much we rely on AI to write the job description, because pretty soon the whole process is just going to be morphed into one big AI, right?
Right. Yeah, good point. Just the job description, the selection, right?
It's a perfect match.
Whoever wrote this is a genius.
I remember one of my first quote unquote big jobs was one that I literally got from an ad in the newspaper. And so I kind of I'm having an AI moment because I'm reading this ad in the newspaper at the time. That's where we used to find our jobs and going, oh my God, this is exactly me. That's me. I do that. Oh, I know how to do that. Oh yeah. This job description was written for me. Right. So I took my little, AI mind and wrote a nice resume to match it. But it's kind of like that, right? You're trying to find exact matches. And in the real world, I think, sometimes we overlook the capabilities and the skills that people have that might work well for the job, even if they haven't been in the exact kind of role before.
Yeah. That reminds me of a conversation you and I had. I can't remember with whom, but they were talking about the sort of difference between skills and experience. Right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might not have the experience, but you have the skills. But
yeah,
traditionally, as we're sort of becoming more advanced, we don't see as much. But traditionally, a lot of the talent acquisition had to do with your experience, right? And not skills.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of overcome that? I think that there's possibilities for technology to help us as long as we're sort of mindful of it.
Yeah.
The scary technology. See, I'm keeping us on the Halloween theme.
More AI to come. I think
right.
we said that about 27 times at least.
Yeah, there you go. Someone's passed out somewhere.
Montage. So the next thing and we all experienced this, right? We were just at HR Tech, not 3-4 weeks ago. I can't believe it's already come and gone at this point. But at HR Tech, HR Executive and HR Tech introduced some new branding, the next generation of global human resources, media, and events. And this rebranding is interesting. I really liked it. I think it looks pretty cool. And, I've heard varying opinions. But what I thought was interesting is the way that they unveiled it at HR Tech. I felt like it was a little bit late in I felt like it could have been at the beginning and sort of framed the whole conference, and instead it sort of came at the end. And so now there's been just sort of a lot of social media about it, trying to, really push it out there. I don't know. What did you think about that?
I thought so. Just for anyone that didn't see this, the name change and it's funny because we always said HR Tech. So really it's sort of catching up with how people say it anyway. So technically the names for the two groups were Human Resource Executive, and HR Technology Conference and Exposition, which has colloquially long been known as HR Tech. In fact, I constantly forget that it had a longer name. And Human Resource Executive, I guess sometimes I would say the full, but almost always I said HR Executive when referring to the publication or the group. So this is really sort of catching up with how people say it. And I honestly think that it was probably a conscious decision on their part to not sort of overshadow the paying customers by sort of stealing any thunder with a big name for theirs. I think that's maybe why they wanted to do it at the end, because unlike some sort of rebranding exercises, as we kind of have been talking about that a little bit, I think in this case, they might have been trying to fly under the radar, just so you know that technically the names you're using are now the correct names, sort of. So honestly, it is sort of a name change. There's a few other things too. HR Technology Europe in Amsterdam is just HR Tech Europe. The HR Tech Festival Asia in Singapore is now just HR Tech Asia. That's good if they ever want to move to take those sort of more generalized names. A few, those are just some of the smaller things, but HR Tech is, I don't know anyone who refers it to the HR Technology Conference and Exposition. I would,
Right.
unless they're getting paid by the word somehow.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It is true. A lot of people are doing a lot of press releases, and there's just a lot happening at HR Tech. And so that's a really good point. And I like the simplification of the name changes. I mean, it's like you said, it's what people have been saying. So it's kind of like, okay, we finally decided to call ourselves what people are calling us, which I think is really a positive move.
Although we are still Sapient Insights Group, everyone listening, not just Sapient.
Yeah. I like the colors. They're a little bit of an offshoot of our colors. So of course I was attracted to that because I, liked it.
Of course. Again, if you haven't seen, I don't know why, if you're listening to this, you don't know, but we're known for our pink, our hot pink. We received a lot of attention for that at HR Tech, which was lovely. And we love to see everyone in pink. We tried to take lots of pictures with anyone else that was wearing our corporate colors.
Yeah, it's getting more it's like becoming more common. I think people like being prominent. So we're probably going to have to change our brand in a couple of years. And
it's like a neon yellow.
Get a new color.
High vis.
Yeah. Bright green, I don't know, something. Right.
I have way too much pink branded stuff for us to change it anytime soon, please, Teri.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, my closet's getting pinker by the day. So coming back to workforce planning, so Paylocity debuted an integrated headcount planning solution just recently. And I think it takes advantage of the Trace acquisition they made last year, right?
That's right.
And again, like I said earlier, this is certainly a gap that we're seeing with organizations, especially those making the leap from SMB, like small business, to some, more mid-market at scale, looking for how do I need to take this up a notch, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it may seem small. It kind of depends on where your journey and history and where you fall into HR, but it can sometimes seem surprising that something as quote unquote simple as headcount should need its own solution. But it really is the case that it is sort of fundamental to, again, having a sort of single source of truth, a centralized data repository that you make all other decisions on, right? Because what could be more, important than knowing how many employees your company has, right? The headcount. And if you're new to this, if this seems strange, I'll give you some examples. And it's interesting because I met with a company called Ingentis, which does organizational management. You could think of it as org charts, but it's way more than that, right? Because it's really trying to figure out how is your company structured? And it comes back to a conversation I remember having. This was around the time of the economic collapse of around 2008 to 2010. And I'm pretty sure this should be clear by now because it's over 10 years. So, but AIG, the big insurance group, was one of the ones that was receiving federal bailout money that was meant to keep these very large companies afloat. Was one of the things that happened, at least in the United States. And as part of that, they needed the government that was going to give them these huge loans, needed to know how many employees they had. And as we're speaking to the CHRO, she was like, they were mystified that we didn't know. And we're like, well, how do you define an employee? That's the big question, right? And that's what a lot of it comes down to. It's not going to be as simple as counting all of your paychecks because, different kind of people, you can be outsourcing to another company for certain tasks, right? And especially at large companies, that's going to be very common. You're going to have full-time and part-time employees. Which of those go into your headcount? Is there a certain hour threshold that they have to reach? What about people who are leaving in 2 weeks? Are they currently in your headcount right now, right? They've already put in the resignation or there's some other reason. You might have sort of franchise agreements or spin-off groups. It can go on and on. As you start to look into it, you realize just how complex this is and why it needs its own software and its own sort of solution to do.
Yeah.
And then like figure out how everything fits in. And then again, with the end goal really of not just being able to say, okay, we've got 22,112 employees, right? Instead say, okay, here's the employees these are all broken out, and we now can do some planning, right? As you said, we're going to talk about workforce planning. All of that is so that you can sort of scenario plan. Obviously, you want to know your present, but also you want to be able to plan for the future. If you were to expand into certain areas, or if you were to change a line of business, what would that look like? And you won't know until you know where you're at right now. So I find it fascinating only because having been in that world, you're going, yes, this is really important. And I would imagine anyone outside going, you got to be kidding me. Software just to count your employees, but it's much more complex.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's weird, right? It's an age-old problem. Like,
It is.
I remember when I first got into HR and, I was on the consulting side and working with a client on comp planning technology, and them not being able to tell me how many employees they had. And I was like, how can you not know how many employees you have? Like, how is this possible? And then you get into it and you realize how difficult, this is. I mean, it's not a simple thing. And so when companies roll something like that out, some people might, kind of, if you're not in HR, you're thinking, why is that a thing? Right. If you are in HR, you know why this is a thing. Yeah. And it's a difficult thing, and not to mention is this getting them into position management? So are they also looking at unfilled headcount as well as part of this solution? I haven't seen the details of it yet, so I don't know if you've seen any more on that front.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So it's looking at, what is sort of the organizational picture, filled, unfilled, what you have internally. You can obviously integrate it to a talent acquisition and figure out what needs to come externally. And so it really is about sort of the needs management, but also sort of setting up any sort of processes and process improvements that need to happen within the organization, right? Because you see bottlenecks where there's only a few people at this position, and, improve sort of workflows throughout. Yeah. So although the big thing there is the headcount, really it is setting up a baseline for some of the workforce management capabilities.
Right. Yeah. And if you're in payroll, you understand this yes. problem.
And you can see why Paylocity.
Yeah. It is something that I think, and so, more detailed workforce management and some of the stuff we talked about earlier will probably be a next step there.
Yeah. Well, you promised AI.
Interesting stuff. I did. I promised AI. We will not disappoint on that front. So, and of course, Workday. Introducing Workday Illuminate, the next generation of Workday AI. So a little bit different unveiling, which always comes with big fanfare, maybe not Apple fanfare, but HR fanfare at, Workday Rising. They always create a statement and people remember it. They introduced Illuminate.
Yeah.
Workday Rising this year. So AI.
That's right. And there's AI within the AI, right? Because Workday Illuminate is sort of the umbrella blanket AI, sort of more of terminology, because within it there are new AI agents, recruiter, expenses, succession, and optimize that will all be in there. And, most of those, I think, kind of, sort of they are what they say, right? It's pretty obvious to tell what they do. And it does use a sort of agentic model, right? It's using these agents, which we've talked about before, which are really lots and lots of bits of AI software that are going across all of your different bits of data and working to both collect and say whether it's good or not, sort of assess it, and then use it on to the next part, all happening behind the scenes, so that it's not just, you think of just one AI doing something. It's really the AI agents are doing a lot of the testing and things that are going on. So you can do things like creating and submitting expense reports. So, as we're traveling, I think any of us have dealt with that. I'm just going to use expense just because it's top of mind for me right now as one of theirs. But I think any of us have dealt with this where it's like, okay, you've paid for something and you kind of like, okay, now what do I have? I have to take a picture of the receipt and then maybe fill in some information. But it should be as simple as it's uploaded. It can figure out from the date and location what's going on, and it just files it off, right? And that is the promise of that. And then you can have it as well through for anything like succession management or any of the business processes that would be through Optimize.
Yeah. And I love their marketing. Like, we're going to orchestrate business processes. And one of the phrases was accounting of all business transactions is touchless and accounts are self-reconciling. That's spooky.
Yeah.
But great marketing, right? And I mean, I think that's exactly what they're trying to do, is make this as touchless as possible, at least for those things that, don't require or shouldn't require constant, human intervention to make them go.
That's right. We're starting to finally see some realization of these promises that we heard from AI, not in terms of their capabilities, but in terms of the results. When we do our research, any of the work we do, we always try and tie it back to business results. And when we heard about AI, we heard about these cool things it could do, but it wasn't, we said, ultimately it's supposed to cut down on these repetitive tasks that are prone to mistakes because of human fatigue or just repetitiveness. But instead they're writing job descriptions which could have, that do have mistakes in them or does have some issues. But instead, these sort of things where it's just, okay, this is just a sort of more or less a mundane task that's susceptible to human error and isn't of interest to most people. These are the things I think where AI and AI agents really can shine, right? Anyone that's heard this and heard me talk about it is I always try and focus on the risk reward balance there. And it's somewhat reward, but very low risk. And I think that's the place to be at, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be like saving you, 20 hours a week. Just save me 1 hour a week. And already, you might have paid for yourself.
Yeah. You hit on one that everybody loves to hate, which is expenses, right? And even things like, timekeeping. I mean, how much time do people spend a day accounting for their time, especially if you're in an organization where you have to put in a client code and you're doing billable work, and, you really have to be very specific about what you're spending your time on versus, just sort of traditional, I need to, check in, right? My timesheet, I'm here. It's 8:30, I'm here. There's a lot of things that we as employees have to do that could be much more automated.
Yeah. And they remove things that don't provide direct value to the business, right?
They don't, right. But that means, it's how we get, if I don't put my time in,
right.
I don't get paid, and or the company might not get paid if it's, it's billable time, but it's not value add time to sit there and try to figure that out. Right. And, having done that most of my business life in consulting, it's not fun.
No, absolutely not. Having worked in directly client-facing companies for most of my life, I know how it goes. And that's a little scary. But I promised Teri when I was bringing her on that we are going to have some Halloween fun. And I was trying to think, both of us, having worked in HR, I was like, this probably the scariest thing around this time of year, at least for me as head of HR, was anything involving parties. Which, especially Halloween parties, I probably just caused someone to swerve off the road that's listening to this, and I apologize. Truly the most frightening thing for any HR person is involving, costumes or especially alcohol. Imagine both in the workplace is like, oh man, of all the holidays. As much as I love it as a person, as an HR person, it's maybe the frighteningest time. So thought maybe if you had a good story, some HR nightmares or stuff that would give people HR nightmares, Teri.
I've been reading a lot about some HR nightmares. They're far greater than any that I ever experienced in in my lifetime, some of them just very bizarre. I follow the evil HR lady.
Oh, yes.
The stories there are just unreal, right? But you're right. I mean, Halloween, costume parties, any kind of parties where people are drinking. I'm reminded of, my first sort of professional job.
Hmm.
And they put me in this office. I was in an office with like 3 other people. So it wasn't like I had one big office, but apparently it used to be the CEO or the president's office. And it had a bar in it, like literally in our office, it had a bar. And I was just like, okay, this can't be good, right? As much as we like to have a good time, I was like, are people day drinking like at work?
Yeah, and I was tempted to say, oh, that's sort of an old practice, but we're still seeing organizations get in trouble for this to this day.
Yeah, they do. But I mean,
Yep.
look, Hollywood taught us that when you went in to do a business deal, somebody poured you a bourbon or a martini or something, right?
Exactly.
So I'm sure that still is happening, but not on the ground. I was doing like support services, right? It wasn't exactly a help desk, but it was kind of like helping people with implementation and services and stuff like that. So we weren't the CEO or the executives in this office.
Right.
What
I
about you? You have a
Yeah.
scary
Oh, yes, lots. I'm trying to think. I know that during the Halloween period, yeah, anytime there was just any sort of office party involving alcohol, I pretty much just went ahead and prepared the form someone needed for when they got released from the company. I just needed to fill out whose name was going to be on there. But Halloween was always a special one. I was looking through some photos, and it seemed like I would always tell people, look, if you're unsure about what you're going to wear, just go ahead and ask me. I can tell you. And yet still people would show up thinking that there wouldn't be an issue with maybe they picked a character that has like, it might have worked in a comedy, but they might have been doing something, that is either sexist or making fun of some ethnicity. And they're going, no, 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 it's funny. It's from this movie. And it's like, yeah, no, you can't do that. And of course, the overly revealing costumes that I think everyone is well familiar with at this point, that you'd think, okay, this isn't like your excuse to go into work wearing this.
Wonder Woman
more.
One of Madonna's,
Oh, yes.
80s or 90s get-ups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. This was, by the way, for both, for anyone, any sort of gender. But I had a gentleman come in, and it was around the time of I think the movie is called Semi-Pro, and it had Will Ferrell, and he played an old-timey basketball player, 70s. And this gentleman thought it would be fun to wear the sort of old basketball shorts that leave very little to the imagination, let's say. And he had them even smaller than they were in the film. And and that was my CEO. So, so yeah, good times.
I'm now having these visions of people coming in as Magic Mike, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
So
I never personally witnessed that, so I have to say I've been lucky, but yeah, I can only imagine some of the things that people have been sent home for.
yeah. Well, any of you listening or watching, feel free to write us or just put in the comments any stories you've got. I'd love to see the conversation around this. This sort of stuff it's much funnier to me now that I'm not directly in HR anymore. So
now that you don't have to be the one doing something about it, right?
Right, exactly. So I'd love to hear more of that, whether you see this, on LinkedIn, or you can write to us directly, as always.
Yeah. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yes, happy Halloween. As I said, Stacy will be back for the next recording. That's one thing you don't need to be scared about. Just sort of a routine thing, but I know she'd still, again, love to hear from any of you. Love to know that you're thinking of her. Well wish is always, appreciated. You can send them into the show, and, that'll be that. So thank you so much, Teri, for joining us. Is there anything else that you wanted to go over before you leave? I know we're going to talk.
This is great. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope I Hope I did Stacy proud.
I hope so too. You did me proud, and hopefully our listeners loved it. I know we're going to mention, and we've mentioned the show before, right? HR, we have a problem. You've had just always, every guest you have is the best guest ever. But what do you have upcoming that you know of? Which guests should people be listening out for?
Oh my gosh. So I've kind of got quite a few in the can. One of them that just came out today, which was now a week ago when you're hearing this, was Ashley Goodall, who wrote a book on change, which really eye-opening. If you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that one. I think it really will change the way you think about change in the organization and the things that you need to do to make things better and to really manage your teams. So that's a good one. And a couple of the others that are coming out, I've got some stuff coming out on workforce management, AI. I'm setting up my first quarter at this point. So if you guys have suggestions or ideas for what you want to hear about, there's some things coming out in the first quarter that'll be pretty exciting.
That's wonderful. Another exciting thing for everyone to be aware of, we've talked about it a few times, but the full annual HR System Survey report is going to be available by the time you're hearing this. It is now available in our research marketplace. It's a great gift for anyone, as we're getting into that sort of season, that's looking to assess or purchase new HR technology, whether they're building an HR system strategy or just looking to understand the competitive HR technology landscape. There are over 200 HR vendors in this year's report. We heard from over 5,000 different practitioners. There are over 3,000 unique organizations represented. And as I said, it is about 250 pages. So
it's a powerhouse. It's a powerhouse of information. And as you're reading it, think about the other questions you could ask of that data, because it's 248 pages or whatever it is, but my God, it just literally scratches the surface on what we know about and what we can talk about with respect to what's happening in this HR technology space.
Yeah, I would say that if we tried to write about every single question we ask, and this isn't even counting all the comments alone would put it over 1,000 pages, but I think it would be 1,000 pages, no joke.
Yeah.
So imagine that you're seeing less than a quarter. We're really just trying to find the things that will stand out the most, but it could mean different things to different people. You might have a different size or industry that you'd like to take a look at. We can do that. Another thing you can do is go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. That's where we do ongoing updates on research launches. We mentioned some of the places we're going to be speaking or visiting, but all of those are within that newsletter. It also keeps you updated on that survey, so you can be a part of that. Be counted. For those of you that already did, thank you very much. But the 2025 iteration of this, I know it's weird to be thinking about it just so we're releasing it, but that will be open May 1st for all of you survey takers. And of course, make sure to listen, as we said, to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by this wonderful person right here, Teri Zipper. And you want to help support this podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating and review wherever it is that you grab your podcast, same as if you listen to it on YouTube. Watch us there. And if you want to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights Group on LinkedIn, X/Twitter, and Instagram. We're always at Sapient Insights. So thank you so much, Teri, and thank you to our production team, which includes Brand Method Media Group, helps us produce our podcasts, run by their amazing founder, Kelly. Our marketing team, especially the fine work done by Summer Oriano. Hi, Summer. The people over at Kickmotor, including Mark Moschetto. Hi, Mark. And thank you, most of all, to our listeners in the community. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. Hope it's been just the spooky brew you needed to start the engines running this week. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.